Statistically speaking, over the course of this segment, 3 new New Yorkers will be born somewhere in the city, 3 of the 120,000 or so births that occur here in a typical year. Most of those babies and mothers end up healthy, but some moms get very, very sick. That's a problem called severe maternal morbidity, and it has been getting worse. From 2008 to 2012, it shot up 28% in New York, and Central Brooklyn is the epicenter of the problem. Reducing maternal morbidity is a goal of city health officials and of health educators, and we'll talk with one of each today. Dr. Deborah Kaplan is the Assistant Commissioner for the Bureau of Maternal, Infant, and Reproductive Health at the city's Department of Health and Mental Hygiene. Welcome to the show, Doctor.
Thank you so much.
And Dr. Sweeney is a clinical professor at SUNY Downstate Medical Center, where she is chair of the Department of Health Policy and Management and the Vice Dean for Global Engagement. Thanks very much for coming on BK Live. So, Dr. Kaplan, maternal morbidity is a kind of grim-sounding word. What does that actually look like? What kind of illnesses does that encompass?
Sure. So we've been calling this severe maternal morbidity, and basically what it means is life-threatening complications during childbirth. And what we found in looking at the data, and I should note that we're the first city that's taken a look at the severe morbidity. We've looked at mortality for years, and every year about 30 women die from a pregnancy-related cause. And we knew that was the tip of the iceberg, and what we needed to dig further to understand this issue, and found that for every woman who dies, about 100 women almost die during pregnancy. And what other disturbing factor is that Black women are 3 times more likely to die than white women. Women of all women of color have higher rates than white women. About the women with chronic illnesses such as obesity, hypertension, and diabetes have much greater risks of complications during childbirth. And so this is one issue that is critical, is looking at women's health even before pregnancy to help prevent some of these complications.
Dr. Sweeney, let's talk about that, exactly when the problem typically crops up. We think of it happening in dramatic fashion in the delivery room, but sometimes it can appear quite a bit before that.
That is actually the major problem, is it occurs before that. Because pregnancy, people think of from the time of inception, many people, the populations that are most impacted. But if you want to have a successful outcome, you have to plan for it. It's one of the most important events. And many women in Central Brooklyn don't think of preparing to become pregnant, not to drink, not to smoke, and to get their weight down. And so you can tell why Central Brooklyn is one of the main places, because obesity and diabetes and hypertension, the diseases that cause the complications, they don't get those under control before they become pregnant.
We have a chart actually that shows the growth in the city rate in recent years. I'm curious, Dr. Kaplan, obesity, poverty, some of the other factors, they obviously have been with us for some time. What do you think explains the increase? Is that just better record keeping, or is there something else going on?
Well, this is the first time we're looking at this data, these first 5 years, and actually based on these findings and the fact that 3,000 women every year face, at a time when we would expect the joy and celebration of bringing new life into the world, they're facing these serious, dire consequences, that we need to continue to look at this data. We've made it an ongoing, permanent part of what our Bureau does. So we're looking further into understanding why this has gone up. One thing we know that as we've looked at based on these findings and the focus on really addressing the racial disparities, we know that some underlying factors lead to poor women's health. And some of that's related to toxic stress and trauma. And what we know is that the chronic stress that many women of color face from structural racism, from intended policies that affect people of color where they live, access to good health, access to healthy eating, all of this is part of intentional policies that have segregated people of color, and particularly Black people, as we see in Central Brooklyn, in Brownsville, East Flatbush, and East New York, where our rates are the highest in the city. And so to address this, we have to look at these broader issues and structural issues and policies that can address what happens in people's neighborhoods. And it's why our city, with these findings, have had a call to action to really look at what we can do at the neighborhood level.
So, Dr. Sweeney, give us, if you can, if it's possible, like a typical case. Mother who is pregnant and this happens to her. What is the actual manifestation of it? What is the sickness she has?
I just want to say one more thing. Where they can't exercise. There's not safe walking space, so even people who want to can't exercise. But a typical case at Downstate, unfortunately, about half of the women who present for delivery have not had prenatal care. And so they come in, they don't know their status in terms of HIV. They don't know their status. At least we can find out their status in terms of HIV right now, even when they come for delivery, so that we can take some immediate action. Their diabetes is not well controlled, and their blood pressure is high. And so you have preeclampsia, which is high blood pressure with kidney involvement. They put out protein in the urine, and they have preeclampsia or severe preeclampsia, and that's determined by what your blood pressure is and how much protein you're putting out. And so when people have swelling when they're pregnant, in our communities that have just been named by Dr. Kaplan, or Debbie as I call her, they don't pay attention. They think it's a normal part of pregnancy. And one other issue is their cultural factors. I'm thinking of a woman at Bedside Family Health Center who said to me, I'm only coming here because I was told if I didn't, they would cut off my welfare. Because we have babies where I'm from all the time and nobody goes to a doctor. So we do have that cultural issue as well of people not thinking that.
And what's the impact? So that happens, but then the baby is born. Does the mother remain ill? Does this affect the child's health at birth? Like, what are the
It really varies,
effects?
and I just want to stress that as Dr. Sweeney, and I call her Monica, said, prenatal care is critical. However, even what we found in our report and our analysis of these life-threatening complications is that even women who had prenatal care, most of the women who had these severe complications had prenatal care. And so as critical as it is, particularly for people with chronic illnesses, we really need, what we need to say to women, but also to providers. If women are in care for hypertension, for obesity, for regular primary care, we want to call on providers to ask them questions about potential pregnancy. We find that often those questions aren't asked, and if women aren't asked, they need to ask and be prepared to ask those questions. What many people do not know, that there's a connection between their health and having a healthy pregnancy. It's not intuitive. And so we need our providers also to really make a point of that. And what I would say is it's devastating to a family to have someone with a life-threatening complication. It's very traumatic for the woman and for the family when this happens. And so there can be emotional trauma, there could be physical consequences. And so again, why we really need to focus on assuring that people enter pregnancy healthy, that people have the information they need to demand and assure that they get quality reproductive health and primary care services so they have the best chances of a healthy pregnancy.
Let me just say, you guys can call me Jarrett, too, since Murphy's so formal. Let's show the map of central Brooklyn and talk again about why there's this kind of locus of the problem there. There's poverty many places in the city. There are communities of color that have faced strategic and systemic discrimination elsewhere. Why this pocket? Does it have something to do with the healthcare delivery system there and gaps in that, or what explains the geography of it?
I wanted to say 2 points. One is that when we look at the communities that have the greatest impact of structural racism, we see it in the communities that have the highest percent of Black people living in them. And those communities are predominantly African American. And so the long-term multi-generational impact of structural racism, again, of intentional policies that segregated people in communities like Brownsville, that underinvested. So this is not about people making bad decisions. These are about people forcibly being put into communities over many generations where there's been underinvestment, where there's been long-term poverty that affects people's health. This is something we need to address overall. In terms of providers, there are wonderful providers all over the city. And one thing about New York City is that every woman, regardless of immigration status, and every woman should know this, can get covered by Medicaid if they do not qualify for other insurance. So every woman has insurance to get prenatal care and can go to any hospital in the city. That is not to say that every hospital is the same. However, one of the key parts of our strategy at the health department, and part of what we're calling our birth equity initiative, is to work with the American Congress of Obstetricians and Gynecologists. That's the professional organization that represents obstetricians and gynecologists, to implement best clinical practices at the time of delivery. And these are called bundles. They are particular practices that we know work to reduce the risk of a complication.
A fascinating aspect of the problem, at least that was reflected in the city's great report on this a year ago, was how it affects women of different ages. And there's sort of a valley where women are at higher risk when they're very young or a little bit older. Does that reflect the fact that high-risk pregnancies tend to group toward the ends, or does that tell you a different story?
Well, there are a lot of pregnancies in the younger age group. In the African American community, not so many in the older age group. That's more an issue with the white population, that they delay until after 35 to start having families, 35 or 40. But the other question I just want to answer that you asked that is really important is, how does this severe maternal mortality affect the family and the community? It does, because many of the babies of these pregnancies end up in the NICU, in the neonatal ICU. When the ultimate terrible outcome of death happens, most of the women leave 3 children, an average of 3 children. So it not only devastates the mother who's gone, the family who's gone, but the community who has to take care of these children, the baby who has to go to the NICU. So there are all of these attendant issues. But women having babies before they are 19 is very common in the communities that have just been named, Brownsville, East New York, and East Flatbush. That is very common. And so, as I said, it's not so much the white women that do that, and they're not in the neighborhoods that have the worst outcomes.
One thing that is interesting to me in that report, too, is that people's sort of attitudes about pregnancy seem to be important. Folks who wanted to get pregnant at that time, wanted to get pregnant at some point but not right then, tend to have some level of problem. But folks who really didn't intend to have children at any point have among the higher rates of morbidity. Can you explain why you think that is?
I don't know. We don't know fully why that is, and there needs to be more investigation. But I think part of it is that if you're planning a pregnancy, then you may be have the information that you need around your health before beginning that pregnancy. I think if women were asked, and we encourage our providers to do this, asked, are you thinking about it, or is there a chance you could get pregnant in the next year, and then received information about what is important to think about, taking folic acid to prevent neural tube defect disorders, making sure your chronic diseases are under control. These are the types of things that, if it's not a planned pregnancy, are not necessarily being considered. And we have to make sure that women really know the connection. I wanted to also take the opportunity to talk about, given as you've highlighted this issue being the most dramatic in Central Brooklyn, what we're doing to address this problem. We're taking this very seriously at the health department. We've been working on this issue for a long time, but with this most recent report, it's really been a call to action for us. And we're looking both at our work with providers, as I mentioned, but also our work in the community. And in Central Brooklyn, we have a particular program, our Healthy Start program, which provides home visiting programs, which provides doulas, which are birth attendants, who are trained attendants who are with the mother at the time of delivery. Women have better outcomes, our research has shown, when they have a doula. We're also looking to implement something called group prenatal care, where women are able to feel more empowered about their pregnancy, and often women who are isolated or don't have a partner are getting the kind of social support they need to be less stressed out and, in fact, to have a healthier outcome.
So, Dr. Sweeney, last question and answer to you. You're watching this show at home. It's too late to worry about the chronic stuff you didn't deal with before pregnancy because you are pregnant and you're worried this might happen to you. What's the most constructive advice you can give to someone in that situation? What can they do now to avoid becoming another SMM statistic?
I think having a relationship with a primary care doctor that you can actually have a conversation with and ask all the right questions. And sometimes you don't know the right questions to ask. So you say, I'm thinking of having a baby. What is it that I need to do? It reminds me of when I was getting a mortgage and they said, do you have any questions? I said, I don't know enough to ask any questions. People have to be able to say, I don't know the right questions to ask, but I want you to tell me what it is I need to do. The other thing I would say to anyone thinking of becoming pregnant is to start exercising, walking. And I don't use the word exercising, increasing your physical activity, getting off the train earlier, walking the one stop before, trying to get your weight down some if you can, because these are the things that are under your control in spite of the things that are institutionalized in our communities to work against them. So get a relationship with somebody that you know has your best interests, and talk to women who've had successful pregnancies and say, what is it you did?
Doctors, thank you so much for bringing us through this important topic. I hope those 3 babies that were born while we were talking are healthy and making lots of noise.